Hi, so I'm Jamie Horsley, and I'm a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C., and I'm also a senior fellow and lecturer in law at Yale Law School's Thornton China Center. So China has made huge strides in terms of developing mechanisms of public participation in the last 15 or 20 years. So there's now a possibility of foreign companies and foreigners making input into the making of laws, into government rulemaking, and into the making or formulation of other kinds of policy documents, et cetera. And some of those mechanisms are very similar to what we have in the United States. The easiest way is to make written comments into draft laws or rules, policies that are put online seeking public opinion. In order to do that, you need to have someone in your company who's following the legislative process, which in China includes both lawmaking and government rulemaking. But the National People's Congress, local congresses, the central government and local governments all compile 5-year plans for what laws and rules they're going to make. And then they do annual plans as well. And these are made public online, in Chinese, of course. But you can follow those and know what they're going to be working on. And then when the draft is actually made public for comment, it'll go up on the website. There are different places to look for it, but you would need to have someone following that to make sure that you knew when the draft was available. And then comments could be submitted either online or through fax or other ways. In addition, both the congresses, particularly the local people's congresses, and governments like to solicit opinions in person too. So sometimes they'll convene workshops, sometimes particularly at the local level hold hearings, public hearings, and they're perfectly willing to meet with foreign companies one-on-one in different meetings as well. So, you know, foreign companies could have a government relations type person who would develop contacts with government departments that regulate your business, trade associations, business associations that are also a good channel through which to make input, and Chinese trade associations to the extent that's possible as well. One other suggestion is the Chinese like to rely a lot on academic scholars from the universities. They don't have as many think tanks and independent kinds of firms that consult and give that kind of advice as we do in the United States. So I think they rely a lot more on scholarly experts than perhaps we do in the United States. So sometimes getting to know who are the professors who cover a certain area and seem to have good relations with the government, and develop a relationship with them so you can be sharing your views and concerns with them, because they're often involved in helping draft laws and regulations as well. So as we know, the foreign investment law just passed is a very general law. It's a basic law and has a lot of general provisions, and Chinese government fully realizes that it needs to come out quickly with a whole variety of implementing regulations to carry that out. A lot of that will be organized under the State Council by the Ministry of Justice, which is now the entity that's responsible for drafting nationwide regulations and rules. And they will often then assign a particular regulation to a relevant central government department to draft. So for example, already last year there was on the State Council legislative plan the drafting of regulations on the National Security Review Mechanism, which is something a lot of people are concerned about. And that was assigned to a combination of the Ministry of Commerce and the National Development Reform Commission. Or I guess, or it might have just been one of them, I forget which now, but there are a variety of different regulations, and they will be assigned to a particular agency. And usually that will be spelled out in the legislative plan, so a foreign company will know who is responsible and try and make sure that entity knows that the company has an interest and some expertise maybe to lend to the drafting process. Then after the agency comes up with its draft, sometimes it will then publish the draft itself to seek comments before it turns it out over to the Ministry of Justice, who will give it to the State Council. For example, people might remember that the first draft of the foreign investment law was published back in 2015 by the Ministry of Commerce. And it had been delegated the authority to do that by the State Council on its behalf. And they actually went out and solicited comments before turning it over to the State Council to take it from there. So a similar process is often done. So you may have a couple shots at the regulation, one through the department drafting it, and then one once it hits the State Council level as well. So in addition to national regs, local governments have some opportunities too under the foreign investment law to come up with local implementing regulations to promote and encourage foreign investment. So companies that are operating in different localities should also be watching out and thinking about, what are the sorts of things that they might want to make input on at the local level. So I've been following the development of transparency in China for a long time, and it's still a pretty opaque place in terms of the politics and decision making. But in the area of lawmaking and regulation making, it's become a lot more transparent than it used to be. So one aspect of that is that China goes through what we would call a notice and comment process for lawmaking and rulemaking, where typically the drafts that are pretty mature by then will be put out for comment, often more than once. And you would submit comments and then sometimes see the next draft and be able to tell whether or not your comment was achieved or was taken or not. In addition, there are more opportunities to meet with government agencies, to discuss drafting, to discuss various concerns, et cetera. And so that's a form of transparency in a way too, the access to the government that is not quite as open traditionally as, say, the U.S. Government agencies are. It's still fair to say, though, that as I mentioned, because of the political nature of the Chinese system, there are a lot of aspects of the actual decision making that are not so transparent. So that's an area that I think Chinese society and the foreign business community as well would keep putting the pressure on the Chinese government to keep becoming more and more transparent. And I think we're still seeing that trajectory, and things are gradually getting better because the Chinese government recognizes that as they move more and more toward the market economy, companies and individuals need to have information in order to make plans and order their lives. And it's part of the Chinese policy now. It's reflected in the foreign investment law that they want to create a predictable, stable, as well as fair and transparent regulatory environment to promote market activities.